Hello again, everyone. Deflect here for But Fair Gaming. Want to bring a new video, and I'm going to do a bunch of them. This one particular we're going to start with is the melee tier list, but I will do the range, the tank, and the healer. Hopefully get them all done this week for you. So stay tuned for those. This is going to be not what is going to be up and coming. I'm going to do that closer to the date. For 11.1 because they are tuning every spec right now. So if you have a tier list today, it's just going to change next week. So I'm going to do that closer to the date. This is just the easiest to play tier list because, easy and fun sometimes go hand in hand. Some people enjoy the difficult specs like Enhancement Shaman. Some people like the easier specs, and there's nothing wrong with that. Whichever you prefer is a good way to play, but in case you're wondering, this is going to be the easiest tier list, and we will start there. And just to give you a little idea, do people enjoy playing easy specs? Well, it depends on how they're tuned, I guess, because right now Ret Pally is leading the charge for the most played character, and it is one of the easier ones, but also Enhancement Shaman is not a terrible amount, an average amount, and it is one of the best ones. So, depending on where you are, one of the easiest, best, and you can see where they all sit. But that's just on Raider IO and just to see the season. And also, tuning plays a little bit of factor to that. So, we will start off with Fury Warrior. Fury goes in the easiest category. There's not much to say about Fury. It's got a pretty simple rotation. You don't have a lot of utility. Yes, you have some, but it's not the most amount of utility, which also goes to a hindrance to Fury because I'm sure they would like more utility or like some more raid buff to get them into groups. But nonetheless, Fury, not an overly hard spec to play. You got a bunch of builders and spenders, nothing crazy. Um, it is what it is. Unholy DK is an interesting one though, because there's two builds for Unholy DK. One requires a little more effort than the other. One is pretty simple to play. Your hero talents are basically separating your builds, and one build is quite a bit easier than the other. Now, for that reason, I no, we could put it in mid, but we could put it in like low end, not bad either. We'll go like first one mid, I suppose. Um, it depends on the build you're playing, depends on the complexity to it. If you pick the harder build, it is going to be typically, obviously, harder to play. But the easy build also does a lot of damage too. So we're going to put it in mid, and we're going to balance that in between two builds. Luckily, they have the choice to play two builds as well, so that's never a bad thing. We'll move into Frost DK. And if this was Frost DK in Dragonflight, it would just go right here. Now, this is not Frost DK in Dragonflight, so we'll just pull that out of the easiest category. It does have some complexity to the breath. You got to keep your breath up. The longer you keep your breath up, the more damage you do. But it also doesn't have the most I guess I don't want to say punishing. It does have a pretty punishing rotation if you don't get it right for keeping your breath up, but it's also not a huge amount of buttons to hit. I'm gonna put it in not bad for respect to play. It's not crazy. If you do switch out again, you could play with the now the name just escapes me. The dragon that flies over top. Whatever build that one is, it would go in the easiest because then you're not worried about playing breath and keeping it up. But we'll put it in because of the two builds. We'll put it in not bad. It's not overly complex. It's got some decent utility, but nothing crazy. You have grip and AMS and AMZ and all that fun stuff, but it's not overwhelming with utility. Ret Pally is just about the easiest spec in the game to play. Now, let me say, that being said, it is still a fun spec to play. It does big damage. It very tanky. It can help your group. It's got sack. It can take out arms in Grim Batal with its bubble. It is a pretty simplistic spec to play. It's really just, 30-second CDs. So if you mess up one, you have your cooldowns back in 30 seconds. And then you just basically mash two buttons until you're out of those two buttons, and then throw in a third button when your two buttons are on CD. So it is very simplistic to play. Again, I play it. I play red. It's enjoyable. It's fun to do big damage. There is nothing wrong with simplistic specs. But yes, it's not hard. Now, that being said, the next spec on the list, Enhancement Shaman, is on the complete other end of the scale. And Enhancement Shaman, when people ask, because I started picking up Enhancement Shaman and never played it before, and then played it midway through this season. And it's the best thing I can do to compare it is Windwalker and Fire Mage combined. It is the spreading, like Windwalker has to do with Tire Palms, and the procking of Fire Mage combined in one spec, and you have different burst windows, and it is a lot to go in. You have your Doom Winds window, you have your Ascendance window. It's just, depending on your target count, depending on how much lightning you spread, it's very, there's a lot to it, a lot of buttons to hit. And then to go on top of all your rotational buttons, you have the most utility in the game. So not only are you trying to hit all your buttons in rotation properly at the proper time, you're also there with a knock up. You're also there with the shortest kick in the game. You're also there with capacitor totem or your other totems. Like, you just have a lot on your plate if you're playing Enhancement Shaman. And to couple all that, you are in melee as a melee DPS. So it can get pretty nutty as an Enhancement Shaman. And yeah, there is a lot of buttons to be pressed. So I think it is the hardest spec in melee. Probably the hardest spec in the game to play currently. But definitely the hardest melee spec to play. Arms Warrior. It's not bad. It's a warrior. It's not overly complex. Would I put it less or more than Frosty K? I think Frosty K is actually a little more complex than Arms Warrior. Arms Warrior, yeah, you get a few buttons. You use your buttons, use your CDs, play on your CDs like every other class does, and then yeah, it's a pretty straightforward rotation. There's not much there. It doesn't have the most utility. It's like Fury. Warriors aren't brought with a ton of utility, but they they still do decent damage currently. I know they got nerfed at this tier pretty bad, but they're coming back, so they're sitting at the easier side of specs to play. Windwalker. Where would I put the old Windwalker? Windwalker it's not a crazy complex rotation. Like, I'm not going to say it's an Enhancement Shaman. You do have some finicky stuff by spreading your Tire Palms around to do some damage. You basically have, again, it's all specs in the WoW, so this will get tiresome of saying they're builder spender specs pretty much. You have dot specs, builder spender specs, some are both. But it's not a crazy amount. You basically run fists on cooldown. You want Rising Sun Kick, and then depending on your target count, you always want Blackout, and then Spinning Crane if you have enough targets. It's not overly complex. It doesn't have the craziest amount of utility. It's got Ring of Peace and some neat little tricks, but nothing crazy. It's got a stun and a kick. And again, it's going to depend on the Unholy build you're playing. If you're playing the one build, it goes on this side. If you're playing the other build, it goes on this side. We'll just put it on for argument's sake, we'll put it here. That'll be it. It's not crazy. It's not easy. To do some big damage, you do have to really plan your cooldowns, because Storm, Earth, and Fire do not match up with Zuan all the time. So you have to either hold Storm, Earth, and Fire, or just send it, and then your Zuan's not as good. And for anyway, we'll put it there. We'll just put it there before I go into a long thing of Windwalker. Next season, though, this is going to change because Zuan's coming down to a minute and a half. So big changes there. Spoiler alert. that is going to be a lot better. Assassin Rogue. It's pretty complex. There's a lot of dots to get out. There's a lot of managing. There's a lot of damage windows. That, and you don't want to be starved for your resources when you're in your damage windows. So there's a lot of kind of planning there. It can do some great damage. It's not as hard as Enhancement Shaman. I'm going to put it... Does it go in the hardest tier or does it go the end of the hard tier? We're going to put it here. In the hardest tier. That's where we're putting it. We are putting it here. We'll put it there just because there's a lot of managing of dots and poisons. And you do have a lot of rogue blinds and grouts and, stuns and interrupts and all that fun stuff rogue can do. Plus planning your defensives. We'll just put it in hardest for the reason this has a lot going on. Yeah, out of the road specs, it is definitely the hardest rogue spec to play. That is for sure. Sub rogue though. Sub rogue single target rotation, hardest. Sub rogue AoE rotation, not hardest. We're gonna put an end here. Just because of its AoE rotation. Yes, there are some nuances during your little burst windows, but your AoE rotation brings it down a notch. I cannot justify putting a hardest on for the AoE rotation of Phantom Knives and then Smoke Bomb or whatever it is. But your single target rotation is it would be in the hardest single target rotations. I think it's like a 9-button opener or something. But as for the AoE, it knocks it down a peg. Just because you have a 1 complex and then not complex, and single target rotation only takes up about 20% of the dungeon. So, this is for Mythic Plus, and I'm going to put it in hard because it's my tier list. So, that's where sub's going. It does have all the, rogue utility, but it will be going in hard. Havoc Demon Hunter. Havoc Demon Hunter, again, like Frosty K, if this was before... you would put Havoc Demon Hunter in the easiest tier. Now, it is not before, and I don't believe you can actually be that competitive with the build, the no movement build. I do believe you have to play momentum or inertia, and that itself, knowing where you are at all times so you don't make a mistake, flip into a pack, flip off the edge, all that stuff should go in the hard just for your pure positioning, coupled with your very, very short DPS windows with Essence Break. It's definitely going to skill up on the mid tier, so we're going to have to put that in the hard tier. Just because of that. You have to be very aware of your surroundings. And then not to pull mobs, not to flip off. Like it's a lot of movement. You got to plan that. You got to make sure you're in the right position. You got to worry about dodging everything while you're doing that. So we're going to put that in hard. And the Essence Break windows are very, very tight. You do not want to mess up your buttons there. You will lose a lot of DPS. Outlaw Rogue. Outlaw Rogue, excuse me, is the easiest, I would say, to play. It's not overly complicated. I would say it's easier than Windwalker. You have more utility, but you really, your rotation really doesn't change for essentially single target and AoE. You basically use the same rotation, so it's got to go easier. There's nothing really to it. You basically, I think it's Blade Fury is what it's called, and then you do your same rotation. So nothing that complex. You do have some rogue things you need to know by playing a rogue, but that's just all rogues. When to re-stealth, all that fun stuff. But the rotation stays the same, so it's got to go. It's a little harder in Frosty K, but I think Windwalker still takes it. Survival Hunter. Survival Hunter, I had a hard time thinking about where to place this. Survival Hunter, again, if you're going to use Shadowlands as an example, the pre-Survival Hunter, before they got into Mongoose Bite again, before they got into a lot more of the melee abilities to buff your other abilities, it would have went pretty easy. You just fish for procs, throw your bombs. It's not gotten that far away from it, but it's still a little more complex than, fish for bomb, hit bomb. You basically just need a weak ore to catch when you had it, and when you have it, you just send it. So, slightly more complex. Not overly crazy. It does have a different rotation, single target, and then AoE. I think just a bit above Outlaw Rogue for complexity. Feral. And Hunter they can still do the, sorry, I forgot to mention, they still have decent utility. They got a bunch of traps, and if you use implosive trap, which I have to double check if survival can get it. I know Beastmaster runs it. It's just a knock up, and then you have your freeze trap and your trank shot and all that fun stuff. But it's not overly loaded with buttons. You just have to know again the right timing for it. You got to buff some other abilities. You want to buff your big hitters, and then that's basically survival in a nutshell. Buff your big damage abilities, and that is it. And then know when to, disengage out and then harpoon back in, but it's not crazy. Feral Druid, on the other hand. Feral, I don't know. Feral, I played a bunch of Feral. I used to play a lot of Feral. I enjoy Feral. But in the end, I'm not sure where to place Feral. Feral has not a terrible amount of buttons. You basically track 3 bleeds, but your 1 AoE ability puts on a bleed on everyone for you. So really, you only have to track 2 bleeds on your main target. It's not, I don't know, it's not overly complex. Your melee, you have your Tiger's window, and then you have your Berserker window. It's a tough call. I don't know, it's a little bit complex. I played it for a long time, so I used to know Feral pretty well back in, I played a bunch in Shadowlands, and I played even Dragonflight. I played a little bit of Feral. It's definitely a fun spec. I do like it. It was just never did a bunch of damage. That was a problem. At 11.1 it's going to change, but it was always on the lower end. Boomkins always cry too hard and get more damage out. So it is a dot tracker. And I'm just trying to see, I have Assassin as the hardest. Feral's not the hardest spec to play, but it is a dot, and it's one of 2 dot classes in basically melee. I think it's less than Havoc due to the movement of Havoc. You get to plan to be in there, and if you do happen to have to get out, your bleeds are doing the damage, and you can leap back in if there's a mechanic. So we're gonna go with just under Havoc is where I'm gonna put it. This is gonna wrap up the melee tier list. So if you just fast forwarded to the end, this is where I put everything for the easiest to hardest to play for melee. Let me know in the comments if you agree. If you don't agree, let me know where you'd switch up a couple. If you'd like to change any positions, let me know. And as always, like, share, subscribe. We'll see you in the next video.